I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. All right, so meeting set up. We have a guest that has to leave by 7. That would be Phil Ledger. I would like to, I guess, we'll open the floor to Phil to start with, and then we can have a couple of comments and reply. I do know that we're hitting a few items that are coming before the Board of Selectmen regarding use of town property and other things. And maybe, Phil, if you can provide a little input on our role versus just kind of, we can potentially say, yes, you can do it, assuming the Board of Health, Department of Public Health, and the governor allows it. But if you would like to, Phil, could you take the floor and go with it?
Okay. All right. Try to keep it the summary version, just so folks understand. We're not coming up with any of the guidance. The guidance actually starts at the governor's cabinet level. The executive office of environmental affairs, the community development folks, etc. And then it goes down to the command center, which is our local public health folks. Our public health folks at the state level. Most of the time you'll have assistant commissioner from DPH, and she's in the environmental health section, and you'll have actually the chief of police association, Chief Farnsworth. You'll have staff attorney Cheryl Sabara from the Mass Association of Health Boards. And then they have Mike Flanagan from the Department of Labor Standards. Then there'll be some local regional public health folks in there. Ron O'Connor, and then Dr. Katie Brown. She's a state epidemiologist. She's on the call very often. But our common feedback to them is, don't let us be the last ones to know. We have actually no say in any of the guidance. When we just push for guidance so that we can be consistent in our response to folks across the Commonwealth. So like just today, we got the rec camp checklist and minimum health and safety requirements for, it's going to be day camps, daycare programs, etc. And that'll be the guiding document for those type of activities. Department of Labor Standards has been the folks that if you're non-essential, you're supposed to request through them. They are also the folks that give you, we still there? Okay. They're also the folks that give you the individual workplace guidance that folks, all the businesses are supposed to self-certify, etc. So, we've been working on contact tracing since day one, so we're like 3+ months into this. I've been working on the environmental health side, dealing with questions, non-essential versus essential, and then we also get all the complaints. Someone's not wearing a mask, someone's doing this. That's just like a daily thing. I work for the city of Worcester. I'm responsible for the 6 alliance towns surrounding it. Plus, I also sit as a Board of Health member, 30 years in Royalston, and then I do per diem for other neighboring towns, Ocam, Petersham, Phillipston. We also have a Montezut Public Health Network with 11 towns north of you, which provide public health nursing for us. So, been in the thick of it. So that being said, we're doing contact tracing. We seem to be the hub for determining essential, non-essential guidance. We try to give clear guidance so that we're consistent. And now we're also the enforcement piece of all this. So we didn't all of a sudden grow extra people or double our workforce. We're still the under-resourced public health department that you've had in the past. A lot of that has to do is, when we're doing our job, and you don't see us, we're kind of abstract. So when you can't see or touch someone, you think that you don't need it. But I've spent 30 years in public health. We've trained in incident command systems. We've trained for, strategic national stockpile. We're actually doing pre-planning for vaccine clinics and distribution when that comes, hopefully at some point. So our whole, actually was interesting. The chief on Friday gave us a little, I don't know if I want to call it a pep talk, but talking about, some things are black and white, but a lot of things are gray, how communication and education is key whenever you're doing, step through law enforcement, etc. I had to kind of chuckle because that's kind of how we operate anyways. We don't have badges, we don't have guns, we don't have cruisers, so communication is key, and we try to educate folks along the way. To explain why this is this. We do understand, people's frustration. And it's become political. Some folks feel by not wearing a mask when it's required that you're standing up for your constitutional rights. And it's pretty simple. You have essential workers that are out there 8-10 hours a day serving you, the public, and they're wearing their mask all day long, and folks decide they're being infringed upon, but it truly, one is being selfish because you're putting them at risk and you're putting other people at risk. I'm a senior man. I'm 68. I'm primary caretaker for my wife. If I go down, she goes down. I mean, there's instances all across the country and the world of that. So we're just trying to stay focused and give clear guidance, and that's what we'll continue to do. The farmers market is set up and operating, following the guidance. Where we were able to get Camp Colebrook open based on the guidance that we had to push for because it really wasn't clear initially. There is a lag. There's a lag between decision making and then the guidance. When the golf course revolt happened and they were going to allow golf course access under certain conditions, we were on a call, and I'm in environmental health, so one of our folks asked, "Well, where are people going to pee?" That's a basic question. Where are people going to pee? And the answer, and this was Department of Labor Standards guy. I guess he doesn't get out that much, but he said, "Oh, I guess you got to pee in the woods." And we're like, that's not an answer. So as you open up these places, beaches actually were never closed. The parking lots were. But as you open up these, whether it's recreational camp, etc., then the question of restrooms come in and how to properly clean them and how often. And because, you have to give people access to restrooms, so a basic need. So as far as where one of the things I think you just said initially was, yes, you control your property, and access to it, subject to the governor's orders and the guidance that we get through the Department of Public Health. And we really try to point people to the guidance and work with them if there's an issue. Most people get it and work it through. But there, again, you're going to always have, we work both sides. We get the over vigilant, people, if they're running in the streets, they should have masks on. That's not what the guidance is. And then you have other folks that just, it's, I don't want to wear, no one's going to tell me what to do. So again, we're in the gray. We try to give clear guidance. So the farmers market is working. As far as the summer concerts right now, I mean, that's it's coming, but a lot depends on what happens with these reopenings. We start seeing spikes, and you're starting to see that in some states that it has happened. And now, who knows, with current protests going around, what's going to happen there. Overall, Barre's been very good. We've had to deal with some complaints, and the business owners took care of that. And then, our cases have been manageable. So, again, I'm here to give guidance. I sit in on our emergency management call every week. And we go through everything that's going on, talk about it, giving okay to the graduation plan that they're going to have. So, we're really trying to work through this and use common sense. I mean, we've always done that. We'll continue to do that. I don't think that was a summary version, but I'm done for now.
Thank you very much, Phil. Is the current guidance, I hadn't caught up to this yet, but are they still pushing the no more than 10 people in groups?
That's going to start relaxing. Phase 2, again, we get emergency calls right before the governor is going to announce a change. So, they're talking about allowing, big question is youth sports, adult sports. I think they're going to allow some form of practicing, but not games yet. There was a gathering up to 25, but then still practicing social distancing and masks. So, my question always runs to, if you set up an outdoor event, let's use that as an example. I'll use the Spartan race. We already got an angry email from someone. Do you really want 5,000 people in town on a middle of the summer? Same question. The band concerts are smaller, but you are inviting groups of people to congregate. So the beach guidance is 12 feet between family units. So yeah, you could possibly do that. And the thing is, who's actually going to manage that and be there to police it? So that's always the question. As Confucius say, do not command what you can't enforce, more or less. He said it in Chinese, but got it on a fortune cookie. I thought that was apropos. So, you don't want to, and then actually the chief today on his talk, because he was talking about the protest, and he's basically saying, think about people's frustrations and anger, and do you really want to, he didn't say get in their face. We don't usually get in people's faces, but you don't want to get yourself in a confrontation with either groups of people or, someone that's angry. So that's the thing. These are unprecedented times. So, I'm a child of the 60s. I remember, protests in DC and Boston, and I remember all that. So are the, the summer concerts, for example, is that critical to the operation of the town? I know it gets people out, but at the same time, are you going to have, and I'm not saying anything about motorcycle people, but, we had a bunch of motorcycle people show up at Stone Cow one Saturday, and that was hard for them to manage. So, just throwing that out there. I will give the guidance, but at the same time, it's who's going to enforce it if folks don't want to comply. And yes, there are things, they're talking about phase 2 now. So that's the next push, where you can allow outside restaurant seating, and some other activities. We just received 2 hours ago the recreational day camp guidance. And then along with that, there's a minimum health and safety requirements for phase 2. I forwarded that. Actually, I can forward this again. I can send it to Heather so you can have it. But that's going to be the underlying piece, is this this minimum health and safety requirements. And that's quite extensive. Folks have to think about, we just had one day camp in West Boylston, Woodhaven, been there for years, and they decided not to run camp this summer. But that's their decision. So I just forward that to Heather. The thing that you want to look at is the minimum health and safety requirements. So, until the vaccine, an effective vaccine is out and folks actually get it, CDC saying it's going to be a 2-parter. We're talking, winter, January, February, March, maybe by the time that's all done. We're going to be living with these safety standards, whether we like it or not. So, encourage you, the DPH site has links. Department of Labor and Standards have their links for what businesses have to do. I'm on those sites every day. And we're just best we can. And someone's playing the organ. Just trying to be, get through this in some reasonable fashion. But large gatherings, like big concerts, right now we're wrestling with flea markets. Because that's a place you just go in, bunch of people, you walk around, you pick up stuff, you put stuff down. That has to be changed in some way. Yard sale, they're saying, curbside pickup only. I saw a couple of yard sales over the weekend. Like, I'm not going to worry about those. Really not. So that's kind of where we're at. They're starting to relax, but then all of a sudden we got a big surge and the hospitals are hit again. ICUs fill up. They're going to back off. but they're really pushing, we realize businesses got to get back on, we get that. But the outdoor seating of restaurants is going to lead to indoor seating. So they've already pushed out guidance on that ahead of time. So restaurants can look at that. So it's 6 foot between tables, no more than 6 people, no paper menus. Server brings you your food. They'll have masks on. You'll have masks coming in, but you take them off if just, once you're sitting at your table. No sitting at the bar unless they reconfigure that to be 6 feet away, because you're sitting in the bartender's face. Some bars, other bars, you could possibly convert some of that to seating. A lot of places are trying to get outdoor seating that they never had. In some towns, again, that's a zoning issue. Trying to get some dispensation to do some outdoor seating. Then they talk about tents. Building code kicks in on the size of tent, fire retardant, all kinds of other things that you don't think of. But they've thrown that out to get people ready for that. So.
Well, thank you for the update, Phil.
Okay.
I know you had something you had to get on soon, but just if you don't mind, I just want to see if Greg had any questions.
Sure.
Well, my thought's always this, Phil. What's the harm in something like Stone Cow opening, where if they do open, if people obviously are going to consume a beer, they're not going to have a mask on. But if someone's concerned for their health or concerned that they may can come in contact with COVID, why can't we function off a rationale of those people stay home and stay away from a place that they fear they may be infected, and let the rest of the public in the world go back to life as normal? I don't understand why we're still doing this. For example, go to a restaurant, then take your hands, touch your filthy mask and take it off, and now it's all good to go ahead and eat your dinner. The masks don't do what they claim they do, and I think they are some sort of sense of security for people to wear a mask. They don't do anything. Nothing real for virus. So why don't we drop this mask restriction, and why don't people just be wise? If they think they're at risk, stay away from larger crowds, wash your hands, wash yourself when you come back in your home, be careful what you bring in your home. But as far as going out in public, if I was someone who felt I was at risk, I wouldn't go out in public to a restaurant, and I wouldn't go to these places. But if other people want to do that, especially the younger people that need to develop the herd immunity, that really need to come in contact with this virus and develop the immunity to it, which most people under 60, almost 95% or more of the population under 60 is not going to have any issues from this. Do you have any idea why they're not letting us develop that herd immunity and let those of us that want to be out and would rather contact it and develop the immunity to it than hide at home and destroy the economy? Why they can't do that?
I'd rather die.
Well, my first answer to that is 104,000 deaths and climbing, more than any other country in the world.
Well, Phil, you got to understand that number's falsely inflated, and 80% of that's in nursing homes.
You want me to respond to you, you got to let me respond. So that was my first statement. My second statement, as far as masks go, they keep you from infecting someone else when you're asymptomatic. And people under 60 do get it and do have complications and do die. And yes, what you're saying is just have those people stay home, and then the rest of us just do what we want.
Normally, that's how it's done.
I wish life was that simple, but it really isn't. There are things that Stone Cow will be able to do in their phase 2. But bars, because of the nature of a bar, is that human contact and socialization and hanging around. That's going to be one of the last phases. If the restaurant openings outside and then inside are managed and are good, then you'll move to those other larger type activities. And to say that the majority over 60, those are the ones that have it, like, we don't count. I mean, that's someone's mother.
I said that's a risk group. But if I was in that risk group, then I wouldn't necessarily go to some place where I'd have a greater risk of contracting it. But I wouldn't, if I were over 60, I wouldn't expect the world to shut down and stay away from me. I would stay away from the risk and take care of myself. It's not up to the world to make sure they don't infect me. It's up to me to make sure that I keep myself safe. And that mask isn't keeping me safe. And shutting down my business and my livelihood isn't keeping me safe. And the 100,000 deaths, if you look at the numbers by statistic, most of those deaths are over 60. About 80% of those in most places come from nursing homes. And shame on those governors for quarantining sick people with the elderly. Because we knew from the beginning this affected elderly and this is killing our older people. Why on earth would those cities quarantine sick people in nursing homes? Or if they've done it in Los Angeles and Minnesota and New York, and they've killed 80% of their deaths as senior citizens that they've killed by putting the sick in with them in nursing homes. This isn't running rampant, killing the population. And the numbers, the things they're labeling as COVID deaths, we would never label something like that as a death from the flu. Somebody has a symptom of COVID and they label it a COVID death, whether or not it contributed to their death. That's never been done in the history of this country before. They're trying to run the numbers up to scare people.
No, okay, we're getting into a different discussion here. And flu deaths, they are recorded when that is known. And as far as nursing homes, there's bigger issues with nursing homes and how we treat our seniors than just this one instance. But this did show issues with the nursing home. So
moving
that being said,
people into the home to quarantine was not smart.
I can't fix your opinion. I can only do my job as a trained public health officer and follow the guidance that's given to us. I've worked with Stone Cow, will continue to work with Stone Cow, and move forward as best we can. Beyond that, it is what it is. And so, do you have anything else for me?
No.
Thank you very much, Phil. Dylan, did you have any questions before we?
No, I know Phil has to go. Thank you very much for stopping by, Phil.
Okay. One day at a time. Stay safe.
Thank you.
And I'll be on the call on Wednesday, Heather.
Thanks, Phil.
Okay. Bye.
All righty. Next item on the agenda would be a presentation from the Finance Committee, I guess, a discussion on update on the budget information. I guess, Clara, would you like to start that discussion?
Sure. I was just trying to put the video on, but it doesn't seem to want to go. So it'll be without video. Okay, there it is. We had dispatch in last week for our last meeting, and Mike did a very good presentation. And they are going to be giving us $10,000. Their budget is coming in under, which was good. We had the school come in, and that wasn't very good. They can't give us any numbers at all. They don't know any of the state numbers. They don't know what they're going to be required to do. And Sheila said they won't know until probably August. So that kind of leaves everything up in the air. We did vote on the capital plan, and the finance committee feels that the ambulance and the police cruiser are the two most important. The rest can be held off until probably like a special town meeting sometime after. And we talked about the 1/12 budget and maybe trying to hold off on having the town meeting on the 30th. We changed the public hearing date. We'd like it on the 25th so that maybe we might have more numbers. Right now, we don't have any change in numbers, which makes it hard to plan out anything. Brian, you want to add anything more?
No, I mean, to me, we don't have any numbers. 56% of our budget is based on the schools, and the school has no idea. The state isn't giving them any information. It's hard to come up with a budget. I mean, we could certainly come up with a guess, but, to come up with a recommended budget, I don't see how we can do it without some input, some numbers.
And we're still about 200,000 short.
And that too.
I would suggest we fund the school basically with a 2.5% increase from their last year's budget, not on their budget, but on our side. Whatever we gave them last year, 2.5% increase, so they stay at 56% of our budget, and that's their fund. And if they want to if they want to go different than that, then we'll have to have that discussion later. But we can't give them 60 or 70% of the budget. It's not going to happen. I'll fight that every day.
Well, Greg, we don't even have that 2.5%.
Well, if we let them, 56%
if we let it go,
budget.
roll, our thoughts were, we threw it back and forth, is if we go with the 1/12 budget, then they have to live with it. And they said they would have to live with it.
Which is level funding from last year.
Yeah.
That's better than giving any increase, but
right now we can't. We can always go back, and they don't even know if they're going to need more.
I would suggest
they don't know what's going to happen.
I would suggest
they're going to need more.
If they feel they need more, they're going to have to tighten their belts. That's all it comes down to. We can't keep increasing our budget to what I'm saying. 56% I think is too much. We're well beyond our required minimum to the school. We're more than double our required minimum contribution. So we've been very giving with the school over the years to try to make their budgets go in the direction they want. But we're far above the minimum contribution we're supposed to do. And we're to the point that it's 56% of our budget. And I don't think the percentage point should go up. I think that percentage should go down. So I wouldn't worry too much about giving them more. I think level fund is the best they should get from us. And like I said, unless we did look at some sort of proportional increase to other departments for whenever the budget dictates, or if it dictates a decrease, then that's what they get, is a decrease like everyone else. But I'd look at the ratios from last year and try to stay close to it on that estimate.
Well, the thing that we're looking at is that we have more time to really get some numbers, especially even from the state. For us, we don't even know. It's hard to set a town meeting and present a budget to the town when you really don't know your numbers. You don't have any idea of the numbers.
Earlier you had said you believe you're about 200,000 short. Is that based on a revised revenue number coming from the finance team?
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Where is the shortfall in revenues?
Do you
right, Heather? Heather can.
Yes, Claire. I'm going to see if I can pull it up.
Okay, I'm just curious how that revenue, what did they do to create that revenue number? Did they just let's just assume we'll have only 80% of last year's projected revenue? I was just curious to the kind of the means and methods of how they technically created the shortfall of 200,000. And I'm not saying it's wrong. They're doing their best to also estimate. I'm just curious how they did. That's all.
Yeah. Heather and Jean worked on that, and Sharon.
Just to
They
be
were all-
just so I'm looking up the right document to share here. Are we talking about FY20's expected potential shortfall or FY21's expected revenue numbers?
FY21.
Okay, and the town's revenue numbers, not the schools, correct?
Correct.
Okay, I just need a moment to pull that doc up. Okay, so can everyone see my screen?
Yep, I've got it.
Yep.
All right, here's the revenue numbers, what we have right here. I'm just gonna move something. Oh, that's even worse. Okay. All right, there we go. All right, so here we have the FY20 year to date. And I'm already sorry, Matt. I already forgot. Did you say FY20 or FY21? So you were looking at
FY21.
Okay. Yep. So FY21, we're looking at projected right now 11,928,000. A couple small numbers have changed thus far, but generally speaking, where we are right now is we expect about $8.5 million in our property tax levy section, or the top part of the budget here. Next year, we projected a little bit less. A couple of the numbers still go up. For the most part. Actually, I take it back. So nothing's really less except for new growth. And that number gets modified a little bit every time that the assessors take a look at it. I believe it originally was in the 30s, and she recently just got some new documentation in, so she increased it to 50. Which you can see is still about less than 50% of what it was projected to be at this year at 111K. Down, if you go down below to the state aid, we essentially leveled off state aid for the most part from the past year. It looks like it's still a little bit high in these calculations, so we might have to, right here, post-COVID. Here's the right column, and we're talking 955. So we essentially leveled it from this year. We did that for all of the section, minus the state aid assessments, which those obviously increase, and we don't anticipate they're giving us a break on that. When you get down here, the local receipts revenue, you have other taxes and excise. So that is about 90,000 less from what we projected this year. As you can see, thus far, we're at 987,000. But again, I think that's potentially a little bit high for next year, and this is a little bit more conservative. Charges for fees and services, we projected about 98,350. Licenses and permits is a little bit lower. Fines and forfeitures, and so forth. And you can also see where we're at currently. So this post FY20 post COVID-19 real numbers. This is what we've actually pulled in for revenues thus far. And you can see these numbers are a little higher than our conservative numbers, but you can also see that they're in some cases a decent amount lower than what we had originally budgeted. So for instance, you go down to charges for fees and services, and we had budgeted 127, and we've only brought in 104 so far. Licensing and permits is about $25,000 off. Fine and forfeitures is about half. Other departmental revenue is about a little bit over 3/4. Miscellaneous is I don't know, less than 3/4, more than half. And then miscellaneous non-recurring, which you only see in actuals, we shouldn't have budgeted for at all because we're not supposed to actually count that until it happens. So that's a little bit of the numbers difference there, and that makes up a decent amount of the difference where it was originally 1.359, and for FY20's budget, the collected thus far was 1.266. to, and we're estimating conservatively at 1.132. So the numbers down here for indirect costs, we're still working on these, making sure that we have the right calculations for health insurance, medical liability, and so forth for water and sewer broken out, as well as debt, and then transfer from ambulance funds. That's the number in the past.
Will happen.
Okay, I see where you came from.
Ted, do you have anything to add to this that you picked up from our meeting?
No, not really. I think we said all it needs to get said, Claire.
Yeah.
And so what you're saying is based on column H, FY21 post CV19, total revenues of 11,706,000, approximately 200 short of our operating budget that you're currently working on?
Yes.
Okay.
And we still don't know what we're going to come in with this year, with what the revenues we've got in.
So what Claire's saying is if you look at the FY20 budget, which is the column C, and you look at where we are currently in column F, this will get updated again this week, but we didn't have anything substantial that really came in. So you're still seeing a couple 100,000 difference between 11.7 and 11.5 of what we collected. We are in the last month of June, and usually substantially everything would have already pretty much made it in for real estate and so forth. However, with extending out when the late fees and other costs get tacked on to the bills on June 30th, and suggest that there could be more people hanging out to the end to wait, but we don't know. So we'll have a more updated, Gene and Sharon have been working on this every week and updating it as they go. We should have a more updated version of it again as of this Thursday. It just depends on how much money comes into the treasurer's office and gets turned over. So that's what we look at. That's where we are currently, and it looks like I said $200,000 difference currently from what we budgeted to what we've collected. There's a great deal of hope that it goes up to hopefully what we collected, but we don't know yet. We won't know for at least another week if we're going to get to that number.
Quick question.
Mm-hmm.
Do these revenues, would the Chapter 90 reimbursement factor into the actual real column F revenues received?
So the answer is it depends. If it were to show up at all, it would show up under F30, miscellaneous non-recurring, in the enactables, and that would only be if it was an expense that we had incurred in the prior fiscal year and got reimbursed for in this fiscal year. But I'd have to triple check with on that one. I haven't ran into that very frequently, but she would be the more knowledgeable person to ask that question to. But my guess is if it does show up anywhere, it would show up there in the miscellaneous, which we don't usually account for until we're working on closing the books for the year.
We
Okay,
are looking at about 600,000, aren't we, coming in from the last Chapter 90 payment?
Well, we actually received a Chapter 90 payment that Sharon
392.
confirmed a couple weeks ago that was actually, I believe, for prior fiscal year.
That was a 392,000 that was held up from our bridge work. And they put in the paperwork for another 600,000, which I still assume will receive that check before the end of next month. So if that 600,000 comes in, it looks like we'll be well ahead of receipts, not behind.
So,
I don't
yeah,
think
Heather, if you could follow up and confirm where that money shows up in the this
Yeah.
chart, or whether
So-
it actually even applies?
So potentially the 300, if it was from a prior fiscal year, would show up there. The 600 from a current fiscal year's work would not show up at all because we run a deficit and hold the deficit in our books until we get the money back. So in other words, I come to you and I say, can I have a $6 loan from your bank account? You say, here you go. I take that $6, I go do my work, and I'm waiting for Claire to give you the $6 back. So you're not actually $6 richer at any point. You're just waiting for her to give it back, and she gives it back to you in the same month. So it doesn't actually even really hit her books as a negative or under $6 for the first month. That's what's supposed to happen in a fiscal year with Chapter 90 is you do the work, you submit it, you get reimbursed all within the same fiscal year, and it cancels itself out. Sometimes we get into an odd case where we do work one fiscal year, we close the books, fund the deficit on the books, and we have to go into the next fiscal year. And that's what I'm talking about. If it does show up, that original amount from the prior fiscal year would show up in this category. But I will check with Jean and see what the answer is to that.
Well,
All right, because it would seem like if it was within the same fiscal year, it would show up in a line item higher up based on local funding, state funding for local services or something like that, because again, the finance committee can't create a budget if they don't have an estimate of what the Chapter 90 funds are. So you're not spending that outside of the budget. So you have to account for it in the revenue that you're presenting when you develop the FY20 budget. So somewhere in here that DPW actual reimbursement should be showing on one of these line items, no matter what fiscal year.
and the 392 was part of FY19's budget, but it wasn't spent because they froze it until FY20. But it was in the 19 budget, but it didn't get to be used until 20 because they held it up for that bridge. But my other question about this, it looks like most of these projected shortfalls are in real estate taxes and excise taxes. You know, the properties are still here, the values are still there, and that money will still come in, whether it has to be through a tax title process, which I doubt. I think once people are back to working, they'll catch up on all their taxes and their monies. So if we are a little behind on those this year, I don't think it's reasonable to assume we're going to fall hundreds of thousands behind next year because of those. I think we may actually have a windfall next year when people catch up on those when they get back to work. Like myself, I'm still not back to work yet. You know, I put off my excise tax payments as long as I can, which will have to be in the next couple of weeks now, but they will come in. And I'm sure there's a lot of people in that boat that have finally got some unemployment from the state, can't get back to steady work yet, and just can't get back to paying the things as usual. But that will come around, hopefully by this fall. And as I know it will for me, other self-employed people are going to be in the same boat, and those monies I think will come back in.
So
The other,
go ahead, Claire. I'm sorry. Yes.
well, are you finished with this? Because I had one other thing that I was gonna,
I think we said enough at this point, so thank you.
you know, we'll know next week's more. Each week makes it more clarified. We were talking to Heather at our finance committee meeting, and on the ambulance, some towns are putting in for the ambulance in the COVID. So we're going to try to do it. She's got the paperwork and stuff to do it, to see if we get approved for it.
Here's
So
that.
if we get approved for that, then we'll have that money in our reserve fund. Do you know when they will be approving that, Heather? If they,
I don't know, Claire. I think they'll take them in as they get them. The first round of applications, if we wanted to submit, is due this Friday. That's why it's on the agenda for this evening.
Yeah.
I'm not sure what their turnaround is on it. I haven't seen any other correspondence come through other than reminding folks that round one is due.
And if need be, we could leave it in the warrant as an article and strike the article before town meeting, remove
Right.
it.
Right.
Yeah.
You know,
But
and
that's,
that's easy to take. Then just bump our addition to stabilization, or or let it roll to free cash.
but that is something that we discussed.
I think it's a smart move. I think a lot of towns are doing it, and I believe they're going to probably approve it for that. Especially, we're not trying to max out our CARES Act money. We're still leaving. I don't know, Heather. We're leaving like 60,000 on the table still that we're not going after from the potential CARES Act.
So, Matt, it's up to you. Do you want me to talk about CARES Act now, or do you want me to wait? Because I have a bunch to dive into on that. I don't want to get ahead of myself.
Let Claire finish that.
It sounds
let
like
Claire
this is
finish.
a good time to at least focus on this part of it with the finance committee here on board.
Okay, happy to do so. So with the CARES Act, so we were approved we have allocated for the town of Barre $493,000 based on per capita calculation. And that's how they're wishing in the state of Massachusetts to distribute it to all the municipalities on a per capita basis. The 493 is essentially set aside and put in a bank for us. We can apply for one up to the second possible distribution of those funds, one being for fiscal year 20, one being for fiscal year 21. The total amount of the funds that we have available to us are 493. We can apply for them in part for FY20, in part for FY21, in whole for FY21, or any combination thereof. The thing that they've cautioned folks to keep in mind is having some kind of idea or strategy in your head, because they're talking still at the federal level. There's been no decisions on this that I know of, unless something came out in the past couple hours and I haven't seen an email on it yet. They've been discussing the potential of allowing the CARES Act funding to be utilized for lost revenue. As of right now, they've said the one thing you cannot use CARES Act funding for absolutely under any circumstance is for lost revenue. So they're very, very specific on that now. But the idea is, and the reason this is important is we want to keep this in mind, because if the town gets into FY21 and the federal government says, hey, you can use this for lost revenue, and let's say that our state aid numbers come in even lower than we anticipated, or other local receipts come in lower than anticipated, we can use it to supplement. So the idea is to keep some money available. If we were to try to use the CARES Act funding for the purchase of the ambulance per se, and I did put that in the initial proposal here this evening, the thing to keep in mind is if you're using the CARES Act to hopefully procure the ambulance, and CARES Act, let's say, comes back and they approve it, then you're going to want to make sure you're keeping that money in free cash still aside and not touching it, because you're going to want to be able to potentially tap into that if you get to the point where revenues come in a lot lower than anticipated, even on the conservative side in the fall, so that you can still balance things and function. It's just making sure that everyone understands that if you take away from the idea of purchasing the ambulance with free cash, you still need to have the funding aside to be able to utilize from some source to cover any deficits in the budget that may be incurred due to changes in revenue predictions.
Have they extended the date by which you have to use free cash certified from FY19?
So they'll let you use the free cash until FY21, until you get to the point where the town submits it for recertification. So let's say hypothetically we don't have a town meeting on June 30th. Let's say for whatever reason something goes crazy, maybe we go backwards in phases or whatever, and we don't have a town meeting, let's say till August 2nd. Well, if we haven't closed our books yet and submitted our free cash for certification, the certification of the free cash from the prior fiscal year would still be on the table and available to us. They have extended the use of free cash due to COVID-19. The thing that we have to be cautious of is once you have a town meeting, I believe we lose a lot of options to do anything later on with some of those things.
I thought once you approve a budget, that ends that fiscal year, and free cash either goes to stabilization or rolls into free cash for the next year.
So
Yes.
if you don't appropriate the free cash traditionally, the free cash you can't touch after June 30th. But as the legislature has passed quite a while ago at this point, probably 2 months, I don't know, it's all blending. I want to say the end of March, early April, they had passed legislation that actually allows the community to expend their free cash into the next fiscal year as long as they haven't resubmitted it for certification. So,
So they're not even basing it on an approved FY21 budget. They're just basing it on when you actually try to close your books for FY20.
So there's a couple moving parts, right? So the first piece is if you think of
I didn't think so.
if you think of free cash as traditional as it is, with the idea that it expires essentially on June 30th and you have to wait for it to be recertified, then the modification to that now is that's not the case. The state will allow you to expend free cash in FY21, provided you haven't recertified it from FY20. So as long as you don't go back for recertification, they'll allow you to expend it. The only question out there is relative to the 1/12 budget. So if you have a 1/12 budget in place, so you can operate in July, and you don't go to town meeting at all, my understanding is still when you have a town meeting after the fiscal year, you'll be able to utilize the free cash. Where it gets dicey is if you have a town meeting and you don't, let's say hypothetically, you don't expend the free cash, do they still allow you the opportunity to expend it at a second town meeting in FY21? Or are you required, if you're going to town meeting, to do whatever you're going to do and get it over with? Or do you lose that right to be able to appropriate FY19 free cash once you hit FY21? So that's a piece of clarification. I did put in the emails to folks tonight that for the 1/12 budget, Jean did ask that we hold off till the next meeting on this, only because they still haven't released the forms from the state yet. And it gives us a little bit more time to get some clarification on just making sure we're fully aware of what we can and cannot do on a 1/12 budget versus a town meeting, and what would have to happen at a town meeting as opposed to the 1/12 budget. So with that, I can pull up, if you'd like me to, the documents for the CARES Act, so we can go over those this evening, if the board is ready for that.
Please.
1 second. I pulled it up before, but had to switch gears for the other document. Okay. So the CARES Act, as we've talked about at prior meetings, has a couple stipulations. You can only spend it on purchases that were not expected expenses as of, I think it's March 27th. The expenses had to have been incurred between March 1st and December 31st of 2020, and they have to be COVID-19 related. They don't really define at some point what COVID-19 related is. And they do give some guidance on this document, but they don't really elaborate very much. So looking at this, they actually divided the application for applying for COVID-19 related or CARES Act funds into 3 different categories. They have the municipal side, the expanded health side, and services and supports to homes, which is more COA stuff. We didn't really incur any current expenses that I'm aware of in that category, so we didn't put anything in at this time. The municipal and the expanded health sides, they both have certain pieces of them that the application, when you complete it, which I did fill out initially just to see what the end number was.
My camera's working anyway for some reason.
Oh, Ted, are you talking to me or am I just hearing you? Okay.
And me, I thought I was muting myself here.
Oh, okay. All right.
Sorry about that.
No worries. So some of these categories actually have asterisks next to them when you do them, suggesting that they believe they're most likely eligible for FEMA reimbursement. As we've discussed at these meetings in the past, FEMA reimburses us at the rate of 75 cents per dollar, and we're often responsible for the other 25 cents. The CARES Act says in their instructions from the state that they will actually cover that 25 cents per dollar. And we've talked about that in the past too. So some of these categories of items they believe are reimbursable by FEMA. So when we put in the actual number, it later calculates it at the bottom of the form so that it suggests that we only apply for 25% of that entire cost for that specific category in order to maximize what's available on FEMA and the CARES Act. So the initial request I have here is $345,522. There is one thing that came in after I had emailed this out to everyone to modify. And the only other piece is that we'll talk about the end number based on when I put the calculation into the COVID-19 spending form and what it spit out at me. So we go down here a little bit, we can look at the specifics. So core municipal services and declared state of emergency. So the first category is the staffer compliance reopening associated with funding. This allows us to cover any additional hours Jean puts in order to assist us with all of the funding tracking for COVID-19 and the additional paperwork that will be incurred in order to get the funds from the state for the CARES Act and the extensive documentation. So you see that number is there, which you'll see there's 4 columns. The first column is FY20, what we've already expended. FY20 estimated, what we anticipate to expend from the time I did this a couple of days ago, last week, until the end of June. Covered by DPH. DPH had sent funds down through the regional planning agencies to each of the communities for the purposes of getting everyone jump-started and providing funds on the public health side, and covered a variety of things. For the most part, we applied all of those funds to covering the cost of having Phil from Board of Health, who you have all spoken with earlier tonight, as well as Judy, who is our public health nurse. So, but that's on page 2. But what you see here is, this is my math doing it out. So FY20 expended, estimated, what was already covered by the DPH grant. So therefore we can't apply for it again. And FY20 total, this form does not calculate out which ones have the 75% already covered by FEMA. So that's on the sheet I ended up doing through the state. The next piece here, we have accelerated telework. So one of the categories that they'll cover is the accelerated telework. So anything that assists with folks being able to do work off-site. I don't know if this is something of interest to the select board, but it's something that's covered, something they've talked about quite a bit on the state level. So I did put this in here. There's a couple things. The first one is the Zoom meetings. So from March until the end of June would put us at about $240 for that expense. I also put in here at the recommendation of the state of doing Surface Pros for town hall staff. A lot of our town hall staff that are working remotely are actually using their home computer devices. Getting them upgraded units of Surface Pros or something equivalent would allow them to be able to take the work back and forth. Also be prepared in the event we have a second outbreak where everyone has to work from home again. Exclusively. So it provides more flexibility. It also provides, as we're moving forward and upgrading computers in the future, we can work on more remote applications so that we're replacing, instead of the hard drives, we're simply configuring the Surface Pro or laptop to be compatible to plug into monitors at the office and to be able to take home to do the work on. So it's an idea. If the board doesn't like it, I'm happy to remove it. I thought this was a good opportunity to put it in there, though, and get folks a little more prepared. You also see training for remote staff by CM Geeks. So I contacted Paul at CM Geeks, and I asked if he could give me a quote. So to provide 3 hours for both cybersecurity training and use of Google Drive software, which folks still aren't, I don't think, 100% on, at $90 an hour. I stuck that in there because I thought that was a good opportunity to get everyone trained on this stuff, especially where we do have people working remotely, so that they brush up to make sure they keep all of our documents and networks safe. Hiring, training, contractors, COVID-19 response. So we have Electric Clean, which is the company the fire department was using for the vehicles from March through May. The additional poll workers calculated about $15 per hour, 12 hours for about 4 workers, $720. Extra police officers time, extended shifts, 5.5 weeks, times the average salary of $924 a week. Fire staff, $18, 10 hours a week, about 5.5 weeks left plus what was already utilized. Extra custodial support, we put in some extra time as we start ramping up a little bit so that we have more time if we have to hire someone or if we needed to for Tony more. The other thing I did not include in here because it was a late addition, I had a last minute call with Ellen and email with her. She did mention that we needed to include the extra expenses for Judy, who's one of our poll workers. Because she's been helping out with all the elections and so forth, and she's up to the tune of about $3,000. So we need to add $3,000 to that line. So the hiring, training, contractors should now read $15,542. The PPE, first responders, grocery, gas stations, and others who interact with the public. Masks for town hall, library staff, I estimated per box of what we've already been seeing on the cost of things. We have masks for election workers, public in the election building, night trial gloves, ear protector to keep on the mask, safety face shields, sneeze guards for the election is the next 3 lines in different formats, and plexiglass for police cruisers. I didn't have a number handy, so I kind of guessed on that one. But you'll see here, so that calculates that section to $8,446 and some change. Cleaning, disinfection of public buildings, so Clorox, bleach, wipes, some spray cleaners, a gallon sprayer, and so forth. That section comes to $2,399.11, which brings this overall section to adding the $3,000 in, $60,308.89. Are there any questions, comments, concerns, thoughts, anything the board would like to amend, change, modify, add, delete?
I have a out there thought. I don't know if it would apply. We've discussed many times that we have many people in town that don't have internet service. That's held up a lot of our kids from getting their education these last couple months. And it's because of COVID. And if there is another phase or there's any more push out or delay of school, homeschooling and home ability internet is going to be increasingly necessary. And we still haven't found a way to get internet to those homes. And maybe that is something that we could fit a piece in under the CARES Act. It's more pressing than ever because of this.
In order to get this in and have the cost expended by the end of June, I think we'd have to do more research on that. And perhaps it's something we could come up with specifics on and numbers of kids and so forth and put in for the FY.
No, I mean FY 21, yeah. I mean 21, not 20.
Okay.
I don't mean to modify the 20.
Yeah, so this is just for 20 right now.
Okay, no, I'm good with this. And
So
285 was the ambulance number we were working with on the budget, so keeping it same.
That's on the back sheet.
So on the numbers you just presented, you feel that there's no need to use a professional cleaning service to clean any of our buildings if we start rotating different public meetings in the same selectmen's room. We're comfortable with Tony doing all of the sanitization of all the municipal buildings.
Well, I put in Matt under hiring, training, contractors, COVID-19 response, extra custodial support, 10 hours per week, 4 weeks at $30 an hour. I just stuck in a number for there. remember, we're almost through the end of June at this point. So if we haven't incurred anything at this time, I think the amount we're going to incur by the end of June is going to be probably minimal, whether it's Tony or outside source or hiring a company or what have you. I think we'd likely see a much higher number when we got into July in the next fiscal.
Okay. Where did the 285,000 for, I'm assuming, ambulance rides of people, where did that number come from?
So if everyone's good with the core municipal services, I can move to the expanded health mission, but it's on the next page.
Yep.
Okay. Dylan, did you have anything? I can't see you on my screen. I only see 4 faces.
Nope, I have nothing further to add. Thank you.
All right, so under the expanded health mission, same breakdown. This one you actually see some DPH offset. So we had about $10,000 from DPH come in, $3,500 in 2 different grants for the town, and then we had additional service amounts to split with the town of New Braintree that we've been working through. And that's been for the purposes of Judy, the public health nurse, working on the caseloads and so forth. So Judy's amount of time, we already paid her almost $4K. She's estimated for another $3,200. We had some of the DPH offset, so it reduces the cost. So we have Phil, same thing. And then enforcement agent. So one of the conversations we had at one of the past emergency management team meetings was that they're coming out with new things from the state on a regular basis, and the Board of Health is generally the enforcers of these pieces. Phil services a number of communities, and it's physically impossible for him to be in every single one every single time. If we run into an issue where there's any complaints and someone has to go on site to enforce an order, they're going to actually need to have someone available to do that. We do have a person, I believe they live in town. They are also on affiliated with the Board of Health over in Rutland, that they're able, Andrea spoke to them, the individual would be willing and able to help us out if we need it. So we did pencil in 20 hours at $50 until the end of June, just in case, and made sure they were available. So overall, because of the offsets, that line item totals $2,909. The transporting residents to COVID-19. This is the closest related section I could find on this piece. Here's the catch, though. On the CARES Act application, it considers transporting residents to COVID-19 medical and testing appointments as one of those 75% reimbursable pieces under FEMA. When we originally started this whole state of emergency piece, I actually worked with Rob, who checked in with MEMA and asked about whether or not that would be considered a reimbursable expense, the ambulance, given the state our current ambulance was in. And they kind of alluded to the fact that they didn't think it would be. So my concern is when I plug this number in on the form in order to put it to the state, it only shows up as 75% or 25% rather of the 285 as our request. It doesn't show up as the 285. So a couple of things with that. Number one, on the form itself, it says, what is your total for transporting residents to COVID-19 medical and testing appointments? It does not anywhere say, what do you want? It doesn't give you any of these options to line item any of this stuff out. This is all for our internal processes and purposes, so we can keep track of what's going on and give Jean an idea of what should be in what category here and so forth. The problem is, though, if we submit this and they approve it, they're only approving it, first of all, at 25% based on when I put the information into the form earlier. The other thing is we don't know ultimately at the end of the day if they're going to approve an ambulance under CARES Act. We hope they would. We think they might. We don't know for sure. And it's just a little bit of a concern, because even if we put this in and they approve it because they don't see the word ambulance and they don't know what it is, or maybe they're not sure that's what we're asking for and they approve it, we just need to keep in mind that it's possible that they may not be okay when we submit the bill for the ambulance at the 25%. The other piece is that if FEMA doesn't reimburse us for the 75%, then we're still going to be on the hook for 75% of it, which, hey, we'll take the coupon if we can get it.
Good
But
question.
keep that in mind. Yep.
285,000
Yes. It's a number Rob gave me.
for the entire fiscal year 20.
That's for the ambulance. That's what they're not saying the cost of running the ambulance, Matt. This is literally to purchase a new ambulance.
Oh, he's saying 285,000 to buy an ambulance
Yes, sir.
in FY20.
Yes.
I suggest we really need to make sure we know what's getting reimbursed before we make that statement. Otherwise, we're throwing off the cash flow, because that's a significant amount of the 400 some thousand, and we don't know what FY21 is going to be. So to request that much in FY20 seems like, well, it's whatever, more than 50% of the CARES Act distributed to the town of Barre to go into one ambulance that we had already factored into the capital plan. It might be better to factor that into an FY21 application when we actually have a better understanding of what MEMA or the state or the CARES Act, which portions actually will get funded. Because we're not, are you suggesting we're going to try to buy this before June 30th?
So I had a conversation with Rob. Remember, I mentioned earlier that we'd been talking about this since the pandemic started and the state of emergency. And about a week ago, he had a conversation with a couple of the local fire chiefs and police chiefs and so forth. And they said that they were putting in for it. And he asked if we could put in for it as well. It is completely up to the board whether we do this or we don't do this. I don't have necessarily a strong recommendation either way. I just have caution. I don't think, they're going to take our money away from us and say, you can't have the rest of your 493 because you asked for something we're not going to give. I do think, though, we need to be cognizant because we are asking for something in, the next 29 days. Because if they do approve it, essentially it's something we should be getting right away, and we, have to work on spending. I do have a little caution, though. As I said, I'm concerned because it's currently in the category, unless I should be putting this in a different section. But I've looked at this, so maybe I'm missing the section. That is not a 75% reimbursable piece, but then it would bring the amount up to a much higher. So I don't know, Matt. I know that the other communities that are doing this have a larger population size than us, but ultimately have the same amount of expenses. So they have more funds available in their kitty, so to speak, from the state on this. So I'm not sure.
Okay. No, thank you for clarifying that. It just seemed like we're asking for a lot of this money in 3 months versus what could be 12 months. Like, we're off balance with our request versus what they're suggesting they're going to give us in total for the 2 fiscal years. You got any comments, Greg or Dylan?
Yeah, I do.
Go ahead, Greg.
First of all, applying for the ambulance now is because we're in the middle of the transportations now. We do have one ambulance that is constantly failing us. It's the right time to ask for the ambulance. The beginning of this, not next year. Heather had said that she talked to MEMA and they're not refunding it, but she specifically said this is FEMA financing by 75%. Asking MEMA is not asking FEMA. So unless FEMA says they won't reimburse it, MEMA has no say in FEMA. So it may be reimbursable by FEMA by 75%. I have been on the phone in the background with Chief Rogowski, and he does think it's in the right section under here. And it's his interpretation of it that it will be refunded by FEMA, and this would fly into the CARES Act. So I'm trying to convince him to log into the meeting. I don't know if I'm winning on that. He's on the phone with someone else. Trying to get him to log in.
You're pretty confident we can process the application and actually purchase this in the next 4 weeks?
I get the impression he can make a phone call and have the ambulance ordered in a day or two. He's been talked to them. The ambulance is available, and he could buy it.
Okay, that's
And even if we
that
pay
was
the
my
money for it,
concern.
we can make the purchase and accept delivery in a couple months, anyways. But we could get the deal done and sign and buy it. That's one of the questions I just asked, and they said yes, you could buy it before the end of June.
Okay, I got no further questions.
I'll try to get him to dial in still and give his direct input before we're done with the meeting. So I'll listen again and back out of here and try to relay to get him to dial in. I'll give him the meeting ID.
You got anything to add, Dylan?
Yeah, does it help us to
Doesn't need the ID.
wait for more information to roll in before acting? Is it, and in other words, is it worth waiting for confirmation from MEMA and or FEMA about this before moving?
So the only problem we're going to run into, Dylan, is if we want to put in for this now, as in this first deadline for June 5th to cover us to the end of June 30th, it has to either get approved by the select board tonight, or the board would have to have another meeting for it before Friday, because the certification does have to be completed. We are under no obligation to submit for FY20. The DLS did send an email out again saying, reminder that the deadline's coming up, but, folks aren't under any obligation to submit at this time. So it's up to us to do it. I do have an email out to DLS asking a similar question relative to purchases of vehicles directly tied into COVID-19. They have not responded to me, so I don't know if I'll get a response on that. So I don't know how soon the information is, whether it's forthcoming or not. And it's totally up to the board on how you guys want to proceed.
I think if we put in and they deny it, then the money's still available for next year.
I'm okay with that, but I'm also okay with if he said, hey, I could put 100,000 into our dying ambulance and I can get 2 more years out of it, and we can still buy a brand new ambulance FY21, which we plan to do under the original capital plan. I'm not saying that's what we're doing now, but that was part of the original plan. You could technically have 3 ambulances working. And repairs might be easier because it wasn't showing up on the capital plan as if it was a pre-planned purchase that wasn't specific due to COVID.
I don't think repairs for the ambulance are that easy. But the worst scenario, say, even, is if they could deny it and we still have the funds to ask for something else later, or they might approve
Bob
it.
just
and
called in.
FEMA doesn't pay, we still get 25%. It's better than not getting something off it.
Bob just called in and raised his hand. So,
Right.
Heather.
Raise hand.
I think I unlocked him. I think he's.
Go ahead, Bob.
Can you hear me?
We got you.
I just got in late. I apologize. Is there a specific question I can answer for you?
Yeah, I'll just lay the story out real quick. We're talking about the CARES application for FY20 and $285,000 for ambulance. I think Greg did a good summary of some conversations he may have had with you about if this gets approved, you would be able to kind of make sure the purchase did get completed in June. So we met the deadline, assuming we have some type of confidence that we're acting in good faith with the application process. Questions of FEMA reimbursement, CARES Act, and are both sides going to actually be willing to cover the cost of their percentage they're offering? So the quick question is, what's your confidence level that between CARES Act and FEMA/MEMA, the purchase of an ambulance potentially could get paid in full?
MEMA won't pay for anything. So MEMA's out of the question completely. the question, it comes down to whether the CARES funding will cover it 100%. And I can't answer that either, because it is all going to come down to whoever's on working for FEMA that reads their application and determines whether that met the need or not. The way I kind of looked at it is part of the FEMA reimbursable money is for transporting of patients. That's an item. We've certainly transported our fair share of COVID patients. We have an ambulance that's broken. We've been repairing it and keeping it on the road. So I thought we'd try for it. And the way I looked at it is, if if the CARES funding approves it, then if the town was planning on buying a new ambulance for $285, and to my knowledge, that was planning on free cash, unless that changes, then that would save the town $285 in free cash. If we put in for it and they say no, we proceed with the plan of buying it the way we were going to do it anyways. I don't know if it's a FEMA reimbursable expense. It's very convoluted what is, and I've asked the questions and gotten not a lot of answers. And so if it is, then they will only the CARES Act will only reimburse 25%, which if we put in for it and the CARES Act approves it and FEMA denies it, then we still save the town 25% of a $285,000 ambulance. That's just kind of my thought on it.
Quick question.
Yes.
Buying a new ambulance was kind of part of our capital 5-year plan. Knowing that it was dying for almost 2 years now, but we keep riding it out. To what level, say if we threw $100,000, $150,000 into that ambulance, can it be rebuilt to become a pretty good third ambulance?
Well, the problem we run into is the truck's a 2005 and they no longer make the parts. So it's not really a question of throwing money at it. It's more of a question of availability of getting parts. And a 2005 doesn't sound that old, but as far as ambulances go, the suspension is really the main issue, and those suspension parts are no longer available. So when we do have a breakdown, it's not a matter of calling the parts supplier and ordering a part. It's a matter of calling our supplier, the ambulance company, and they start calling every distributor of that ambulance across the country to try to find whatever parts may be sitting around a shelf. And, if we're talking about $285 for a brand new one, I don't really see a financial benefit to the town to put $100,000 into it. And then on the flip side of things, with the state, it's just not as easy as getting a third ambulance. That would require a third license, which also costs money. It would require outfitting the ambulance. Unfortunately, in Massachusetts, as many people know, it's just not a matter of let's just do something. The regulation and the oversight is such that to outfit it, to make it a third ambulance, at a minimum, we could not put equipment on it, but we still have to have it registered and licensed as an ambulance, which is, again, more funds. And then we actually have no place to put one. So then it would have to sit. Something would have to be parked outside, more than what's already parked outside.
All right.
I mean, valid question. I mean, I think it certainly behooves us to have, a third, but I think financially it doesn't make a lot of sense to me to spend $150,000 on something if you're planning on replacing it with something that's $285.
Yeah, that was more of my contingency. If the CARES Act or FEMA were not going to provide funds to buy a new ambulance, would they provide funds to repair an ambulance that technically could be interpreted as it was riding more because of COVID and the repairs are due to COVID, versus let's buy a new ambulance that we already planned on buying?
Right. And again, if we put in for it and we don't get it, I mean, we're not any worse than where we were. If we put in for it and get it, I kind of look at it like it could, if we put in for it, we don't get it, the money is still available. As far as I understand the CARES Act, we don't lose that 285. It's still potentially there for us to put in for other items. If they say no, then we're in the same position that we are right now. And I may be wrong because it's very confusing when you read the full act and what's covered and what's not, and then what's covered by FEMA separate from CARES. And I'm sure Heather can attest that it's not the most easy thing to understand.
Okay, no, my other bigger question was, the CARES Act, I gotta go back, but I believe Heather had mentioned something like 493 total for FY20 and FY21. And of that, we're requesting an FY20, 345,000, only leaving 147,000 for FY21, which potentially extends for more months than FY20. So that was the other thing I would just wanted to consider is this the right use, or would it be better served? Or what I mean by that is a different style of transport vehicle that literally is designed to help people get from medical and testing appointments, not necessarily a full-blown ambulance. Or other, like, in other words, what other type of community outreach or support is the town going to do for this? That if we take all the money now and use it on an ambulance, all of a sudden we only have 147 left for the next, well, the way Phil was putting it, it could be till next March. And it was just a question I had. I don't think I have the right answer myself, so I just wanted everybody to kind of think about that. Apparently, we got to approve this tonight to submit the application by Friday.
If we get the 285 there, though, that's 285 in cash we'll still have that we can cover something else with.
The other thing too is what are you planning on purchasing for another 150,000 or whatever we'd have left?
Well, Greg brought up a good point. Extending internet, helping get people better at dealing with remote access to things, upgrading certain facilities so when people do come in, potentially they can feel more comfortable in workspaces if they need to. I'm not sure about the library, but I know in Worcester they're building all kinds of plexiglass barriers at every counter. I'm just saying these little things, I don't know how much has been factored in internally yet, because to a point, we ask a lot of our town administrator, but one, she's only been here a couple months and we didn't hire her to be our facilities manager and all of that. So there is a balance, and I'm not saying she isn't using resources and talking to different department heads, but I don't know how much of that has really been reviewed, say, in next fall. Are there certain things we're going to have to do where we need to kind of improve what we're doing and try to help the community better? Even if it means we can use some of this money to, as Heather mentioned, it's potential this money might in FY21 be open to help address lost revenues. But if we use it up, it won't be. So that was, it's.
Or it may not be at all because that's not, that hasn't been approved yet either. So I'm just giving you an option as a potential way of replacing an ambulance without cost. I mean, honestly, whatever the selectmen decide, if there's other projects where you feel that money is better served, by all means. I just looked at it as a potential. I know I've spoken to a few other fire chiefs that are also attempting to obtain an ambulance via this funding.
Okay, no, and Bob, don't get me wrong. I wasn't trying to refute your recommendation or request. I'm just trying to think of the bigger, add that into the big picture. So
without the ambulance purchase, we're only using up $60,000 of the money. and that's buying $30,000 worth of Surface Pros. So otherwise, townwide, we've used up $30,000 and other things in this town, and those expenses won't change too much. But yeah, maybe some service windows and things. If we could utilize most of that money and not lose it, would be a good thing. And if we can make sure we utilize $285,000, but now, even if that fund runs out, then we can go back to our cash reserves and spend out of that, rather than just spend the $285 on an ambulance. If we take $285 free cash and buy the ambulance, and then, a year from now we leave $100,000 on the table with the CARES Act, and we're foolish, because we're not going to just get that. It's just not used. So I'd rather utilize the CARES money in any way we can that's towards this and save our cash. That's why I'm thinking of it.
I know Chief Carbone also had a comment in here, or he raised his hand to talk. At least I see a hand, but I don't see a microphone. Heather, can you see if you can help the chief?
Chief, can you hear us now?
I now see his microphone, but he's muted. There, oh.
Oh, I pushed a button same time you did. How about now?
Still,
Yeah.
There you go.
All right. I just wanted to weigh in a little bit. We keep hearing about funds coming available through the CARE Act that haven't been here, that may or may not be. And that for us, we may get more money than right now is on the table. There may be a specific law enforcement check that's sent out. We don't know that, but they're talking about it. In my experience, doing what Chief Rogowski is talking about puts you in a position to be one of the smart ones if it goes through, and it probably will. And I would hate to see us miss this opportunity.
All right.
I think it's one of those things, Matt, hindsight will be 2020. If we don't spend it and it comes down to the fact that, in 6 months from now, they determine we can use it for lost revenue, we're going to say, man, I wish we saved it for lost revenue. However, if we don't spend it and 6 months from now, they come back and say, you can't use it for lost revenue, and we don't have enough purchases to equal that amount of money, we kind of lose out on some money. We're going to say, I wish we had bought it. So I don't honestly know if there's a really good answer either way, because there's just too many unknown variables. I was just looking at, now's a chance to get us another needed piece of equipment and try to save the town $285. And like Greg said, if the $285 will still be there and we could use it for something else, potentially lost revenue, or if we submit the grant and they tell us, no, that's not an eligible cost, we're not going to fund it. As far as I understand, that $285 is still available for other purchases in FY21. And then we're in the same boat that we're kind of in now, figuring out how we're going to buy a new ambulance.
Okay. No, and that makes sense.
Trust me, I've had many conversations with Heather, and we've gone back and forth on what's the best answer. And I don't know if either of us have come up with one other than we need more money for every, in all the departments. It just is kind of a tough boat without having known, facts of what's going to actually transpire. And because there's also talk about more CARES funding coming, in the next fiscal year, which is just talk right now. That's not a confirmed thing either.
All right. I feel comfortable with the discussion, probably saying as much as can be said at the moment. Are we at the point, Heather, where you've kind of presented it and you need the Board of Selectmen to kind of just vote on this application?
Yes, so there's a letter in your packets. It's the page right before, it's called Attachment B Certification. The amount I had in it was a higher number, the 345, because it didn't include the calculations from the state's forms, which I didn't know until I plugged it in afterwards. I just went back and replugged in by adding the $3,000 we had talked about for Judy's time. So that brings us to 110,176. So the amount I'm asking the board to approve for at this point is the 110,176. Please keep in mind that what that means is that's assuming that FEMA reimburses us to 75% for the likely eligible sections. The only update on FEMA's grants came from Rob, and that was that the forms are finally in, and they're actually going to allow us to apply for reimbursement. So we're going to work with Rob and Jean and myself to get that in work on it sometime next week to get things started to go. So hopefully we'll get everything recovered. But so going back to this, so the amount, Matt, where it has your name on it, I would just have to change that amount, email it over to you. But for 110,176 should be the final number. Sandy, 110,176.
Because you're removing the 75% of the 285,000?
Yeah, so what happens, Matt, is when I did this, I hadn't tried going in to put everything into the state form yet. So it allowed me to plug everything in without hitting submit so that I could figure out what the total calculation was. So any cost that it did not feel like certain categories of things it thinks or the state believes are likely reimbursable for FEMA. So it only calculates the total amount down to 25%. Other categories like the Telework category and so forth, those it's covering 100% because it does not believe FEMA will reimburse. So the total, like I said, the total amount when I just went and updated the formula everyone was talking is 110,176.
I'll make a motion that we authorize Matt to sign the attachment certification for $110,176 for the CARES Act funds.
Sure, I'll second that motion.
Any further discussion? Call for a vote.
Sullivan, yes.
Clark, yes.
Matt Urban, yes. All righty. So, did I see the email correctly, Heather? The special event permit for the Savage Race was withdrawn?
Yes, that's correct.
Okay. Building commissioner appointment. Is there a reason we're only writing it for 1 year?
If I recall correctly, it's what was discussed with Dylan and Greg the last time the board met when they were discussing the appointment of him, that we were including a probationary period and for the time just 1 year. We can put it whatever the board wishes. That was just my understanding of the last meeting. That's why I kept it to 1 year. And I think we're probably all set on this because it was voted last time. I just wanted to put it on one more time to make sure it was very clear, and Ellen had the specific dates and so forth as well for her records.
So, Greg, how do you remember? Was it a?
I'd suggest we do some sort of probationary period. We debated whether or not we actually had one in the write-up already, so we didn't want to make something redundant. Then as we review the contract, typically annually anyways, between the towns to see what changes, we have to revise annually the hours and things. There was no harm in having a year contract and renew it. We can always jump to 3 next time.
I didn't think this was a contracted position.
It's not a contract.
Oh, that's right. It's not.
It's just a, we just did an offer letter for him, but generally speaking, with all positions, it's up to the board on how long you guys appoint. Most appointments are generally 1 or 3 years, just as a rule of thumb.
So, but if we point for 1, it's a good probationary period for a year. And we can reappoint from there or reconsider if it doesn't work, but I can't imagine we're going to have a problem.
Okay. So he is accepted it at what rate did he ended up accepting it?
We offered it to him at the same amount that we were paying Brianna for 35 hours a week.
All right.
And we discussed it was a salary position, so we didn't have to say 40 hours. It met the criteria that to be salaried, so he's going to have to perform whatever duties are necessary, whatever time is necessary to fulfill his duties. And he agreed that he'd definitely be available for late night calls, for car accidents, house fires, things like that. I saw no reason to try to up the hours to any more than the 35 obligatory hours that we expect him to be there.
All right. Do we have a motion to approve the appointment and the wage authorization? Or did you guys already? You had to offer last time.
We made the offer to him. He's accepted. So we would have to do an appointment starting. What did we say? Heather, June 8th, he said?
June 8th is when he's available and ready to start.
So we'd have to authorize the appointment for June 8th and the wage authorization.
So I'll make a motion to approve the appointment for starting date of June 8th for William Cantel for the Regional Building Commissioner position for the town of Barre.
Second.
Any further discussion? Call for vote.
Sullivan, yes.
Clark, yes.
Matt Urban, yes. I don't recall. I don't think I remember seeing the wage authorization in the packet. So I can't read off the specific salary number in the wage authorization to make a motion. But there it is. Okay, I found it. My bad. I make a motion to approve the wage authorization for William Cantel at $63,705 annual salary.
Second that motion.
Any further discussion? Call for vote.
Sullivan, yes.
Clark, yes.
Matt Urban, yes. So the board has been presented with 3 finalists for the Town Administrative Search Committee. Prior to making any announcement of those names, I do want to mention that Heather had withdrawn her name prior to any notice of the finalists, at least publicly. So she is no longer kind of excluded from the process, let's say, although her tenure may be ending at the end of the month. We can move forward with discussing the finalists and maybe even coordinating interviews, et cetera, and include her moving forward. Did we want to list the finalists, name them here, and then post them later, or just do it at the next meeting when we set up interviews? What's your recommendation, gentlemen? Start with you, Greg.
I believe we need considerable discussion on this before we announce anything. The wrong button there. I think there's more deliberations to be made about the candidates, and I don't know if those are appropriate in open session or executive session. But I think we need to have more discussion about this before we accept these 3 finalists as our finalists.
Okay. I got a feeling if we're delving into more than the 3 finalists, I do believe it may have to be executive session.
That's my concern, yes. Have you both had a chance to look at the packets of the finalists and review the resumes of the 16 applicants?
I have not gone through the 16 applicants, just the finalists.
I would recommend doing so.
All righty.
And I would recommend looking at the qualifications of the finalists. I struck 2 of them on paper that should have made it past. One for it, not the education or the job, didn't have the degree required. One of the outlines we said was they had to have a degree for the public administration or business management, and they didn't have the appropriate degree, and they didn't have the appropriate education time, work experience, and it was noted in the minutes by the committee, but there was still one of the finalists. I would have struck that candidate from the beginning because of the education. And there was another one that, looking at the resume was not even filled out. It was saying, the job application was never completed. It was just said, see resume. I would normally not count an applicant like that if they don't have the time to fill out a job application. It doesn't seem to be making, it sets an impression, and one of their finalists also struck the whole job application to see resume, didn't fill it out. I don't feel we were brought 3 qualified candidates, so I don't think we've. Unfortunately, I don't think we've got what we asked for from the charge yet at this point. And I'd like to look at some of those other candidates in executive session with the board.
Okay. Your thoughts, Dylan?
Yeah, more time to go over the candidates, more time to deliberate at an upcoming meeting, I think is a wise move for such a big decision. So I think we should continue this conversation if need be in executive session at our next subsequent meeting.
I would recommend doing it tonight at the end of this meeting. It is on our agenda.
Actually, the one on the agenda is for personnel review.
I thought we had discussion
discussing
the candidates. I thought that was on the agenda specifically.
Deputy Chief contract is the specific executive session agenda item.
Oh, so although this item is on there, since it's not listed as executive session, we can't go to executive session on it?
I believe
this item's on our agenda.
So
go ahead, Heather.
There's a mixed viewpoint on this, right? So in general, you're only required to put on the agenda items that are reasonably anticipated by the chair. So if the chair did not reasonably anticipate that there was going to be discussion that rose to the level and under one of the sections that could go into executive session, we wouldn't, he wouldn't know to request that as one of the agenda items on here. You can theoretically go into it. Most of the time, in general, it's not about anything specific. It's just about the candidates of the candidates for the TA search committee. So, theoretically, we could probably do it without too much of a concern, and the board will have to schedule subsequent meetings anyway, depending on what the decision is out of that. It's up to the board if they want to go into exec for it tonight afterwards, or if they want to wait and go set a meeting in 48 hours or 72 at this point, because it would be a late meeting.
My feeling time is of the essence at this point. These candidates have been hanging on for 2 months, and we do need to fill the position. So I would think it would be important to at least open a discussion on it. Maybe we'll need to follow up again on it in more detail. But I put a lot of time into this in the last 2 days.
I didn't expect to talk about all 16 applicants, so I didn't put any time into the ones prior to the finalists to be ready to actually have a discussion tonight about that.
Well, I've narrowed it down to 6, and I could take if we went to executive session, In 5 or 10 minutes, I could explain the ones that I struck, and you'll see why very clearly. I think you both agree on paper, and I can demonstrate why the 6 I selected were chosen. And that would at least get us to agreement to look at if that's what happens, look at those candidates, and then we could come to another meeting prepared as a group, all looking at the same things. So I'm not looking for an extensive executive session. I'm looking for a brief one. Kind of give you the selectman report on these that I've done after reviewing what I have.
Okay. Well, later when we get to the executive sessions, I would suggest that as long as the whole board is accepting of this, we'll add another executive session item in relation to that. I don't know if we've got to dive into and out of executive session for each item. I'm guessing we do because we have to keep separate minutes. But when we're done with all the open session stuff, we'll go into our executive stuff.
Sorry, I was just trying to help you out there, Matt. So you can go into executive session once. You don't have to go into 2 of them. You just have to go in for multiple purposes.
Okay, then. So when we do that, motions, et cetera, we'll make sure we use the multiple purposes, like we clarify what we're doing. Thank you, Heather. So that's that. Next thing is interim town administrator. So we received a letter from Heather indicating that our interim town administrator agreement does expire June 30th. And she is currently looking to identify that as her last day working for Barre. And so she also wanted to discuss the paid time off that we had in the contract. So I guess we can discuss that. The idea of whether we're paying it out, how it gets used, use it or lose it, all those questions that came up. One question I would definitely need to follow up with our labor council is just to clarify the difference in paid time off and how it's defined versus vacation time versus sick time. That all falls under a generic definition of paid time off. But you don't have to pay somebody unused sick time when they leave. You do have to pay them unused vacation time or allow them to take it as they leave. And so I'm not quite sure how this is defined. So probably the discussion should more be about what do we think is fair and reasonable, and then figure out if how it's defined makes a big difference in the way we're approaching this. Heather, what is your preference?
Well, if the world was perfect, I would say I would love to take my time off because I could use a break as everyone else could. The problem is that we have a lot to do and a lot to wrap up for the town to leave everything in the best position I can by the end of the month. So based on that, I think it would be in the best interest of the town to probably pay me out the unused time so that you guys have as much time with me as you can by the end of the month. That being said, if there's not an appetite to do that, I am more than happy, if need be, to take those 50 hours the last week and a half. And I think I put a specific date of when that would start so that I would get the full 50 hours, assuming about 10 hours a day, and not including Fridays, to cover us, which would mean that I would be there, I think, until June 23rd would be, I think, my first day on paid time off. And that would just be my last working day, and I'd be on vacation till the end of the month. So it's up to the board on what the preferences of the board. I know the board did just do the paid timeout for I believe the police chief who had unused vacation time that he was unable to utilize before the end of the fiscal year due to COVID-19. Again, I would have happily taken my vacation time. I was intending absolutely 100% to take it. unfortunately, I was here a couple weeks and the pandemic hit, and I haven't really been away from my phone computer or linked with everybody for more than a few hours at a time on any given day. So
I got you. Just wanted to double check one item. If I recall, we combined all potential vacation and sick time into a set number of PTO days under the contract, correct?
I can pull it.
I believe that's what we did, and we may have an opportunity to put this under the COVID money as well, because clearly the only reason she hasn't taken it is because of the COVID. This is another one of those forced payouts that we wouldn't have incurred, which we could also probably do with the officers or any other people that we pay out for losing, time and rollover. But that can go in the next packet on COVID.
So yeah, so I guess I just got to try to remember, what did we give her? 15 paid time off days?
We did number of hours, and that's what I think she's recalling from. We just did a set number of hours. We didn't want to break it down. You had suggested, as I recall, we'll see when she gets a contract out, you'd suggested a straight paid time off and not break it down for whatever. And I thought that's what we did. And we were sure she'd use it because she wanted the time because she had something in mind for it. But as this COVID developed, that's why she couldn't take it. So we were planning on losing the office for so many days, not losing extra money. And now we're going to lose extra money because of the COVID. So I would think we should pay her, and I think we should put this into the COVID money.
But you would consider that all vacation time, not any of those paid time off hours, sick time?
Even if she was sick, she couldn't take the time off from her duties during this. She had to continue to do them. We couldn't even, and we would have paid anyone else the sick time if they were sick from COVID. But she hasn't been given the opportunity, even if she's home or whatever. She's answered the phone every time I've called, and she's always been available. So if we called it personal time off, it's personal time. We can't call it sick or whatever anyways.
Right, but that's where I don't know the legal definition of paid time off. Is it the same? Is paid time off treated just like vacation, where the minute
I believe that was our intent.
We owe that to her?
I believe that was our intent. My impression, that was our intent. We gave it to her. Be it sick, personal, or sick, she's getting so many hours paid time. We intended for her to take those hours completely when we gave them to her. That's what I thought. And
my understanding was we wanted to have the flexibility because the personnel policy didn't allow her to even accumulate sick time before we expected her to leave. Same with vacation. Right. And so we were like, here's, like you said, number of hours,
right,
you can use for these reasons.
Specifically, that's 5 days at 10-hour days. And Andrew was getting something like, 15 for a year, and it was a third of it, and it was pretty comparable. And I think that's why we went down that road. But he would have got personal days, sick days, and 50 hours, at least in that time, 50 hours of vacation time. So it was far less hours overall than Andrew would have had. So I think that's how we kind of looked at it. We'll know when she gets a contract out exactly, but
okay.
I believe, once again, it's attributed to COVID, because we would not have had this expense. She certainly would have taken her time. That's why she wanted the time. We know her name has changed. There's probably a reason she wanted that time, and unfortunately for her, she didn't get to have it.
Well, I guess the next question is, do we need to revise our FY20 CARES Act reimbursement application if we want to throw in all of these unexpected expenses that you just mentioned?
Do we have to?
That's
actually, they would have to go in. They would have to go in. We should do that, but we don't know how it's going to hit in the police side yet. Totally. We do know with the chief and possibly deputy chief. I don't know. We may have the same thing. Yeah, I don't know. We're applying this to fire chief or not. I mean, certainly he's been pretty busy. There's not a lot of people we said they can't take time off. And Heather has had a few uptown as well. She'd have to let us know, but I would suggest we do get that number and maybe modify it.
Okay. Dylan, what's your thoughts on, once we see the contract, we can determine it, but I feel comfortable with what Greg was saying. We generally just said, here's a number, here's paid time off. Use it within your period of time that you're interim, June 30th. Do you just pay it all out, or do you think there's 2/3 of it is viable vacation time, 1/3 of it was more of a use it or lose it type sick time? I'm just curious. Again, I have no clue how legally it's defined, so I might be talking about stuff that we don't even have the right to withdraw on. I just wanted to get your input, Dylan.
Yeah, I'm inclined to go with the option that Heather prefers, if it's possible and prudent for us to do so. I certainly know there's been a lot of nice days where I'm sure she would love to be on the mountain bike with her spouse, but instead she's talking to all of us on the phone and checking her email. So I'm sure this wasn't her intent to not take her time off. So if it's at all possible for us to do the full payout, I think that seems fair if it's possible for us to do it.
All right. I would say as her being a contracted temporary employee, it really sets no other precedent across the employee spectrum. So no matter how anybody interprets this, if we choose to just pay off all remaining paid time off, then it doesn't set precedent. And I have no problem with that type of motion, to the point that I'm not even concerned unless Labor Council comes back and says you can't do it. Then I'm willing to make the motion to just plan to pay her out and request that she continues to work for us until June 30th, because we would have a void that, maybe I'm wrong, but I don't know about you, Greg or Dylan, but I'm not quite ready in the next month to jump in and take over a lot of the stuff she's been doing for us. And so having her in there is pretty critical, I think, for us right now.
I'm sure Sandy agrees.
So, do we want to wait to see the contract if she's looking it up, or do we just want to make a motion?
I'm comfortable with making a motion that we pay Heather out the paid time off hours that we promised her that she couldn't use.
Yeah, I would like to second that motion.
All right. Any further discussion? All right. I will say one last thing, though, that it's well deserved. She's put in a lot of time, and when we hired her as an interim, we were not talking COVID. We asked her to come in and figure out our town and help us get the budget ready for June. And then we said, oh, by the way, throw away your full-time job and pull in COVID and make that your full-time job and somehow make sure everything else happens. So it's quite a whirlwind. And I do want to say that now that I have the opportunity, and I'll think about it now publicly, I'll say I appreciate what she's done for us since she's been on the job.
Absolutely.
Same.
Call for a vote.
Clark, yes.
Matt Urban, yes. So don't go looking that up, Heather. We're all set.
Okay, awesome. Thank you.
Thank you.
And if we could discuss again the, I don't know how difficult that is to get the number together for what we're going to pay out on the payouts for the use it or lose it time, but that is a COVID expense on us, and we should include that in the line item for the reimbursement. I don't know exactly where. I could peek and see if I can find a spot for it, but Heather, what do you think?
I was thinking it might be something we could throw in the, or have prepared ready to go for the FY21 piece, because you're not going to really know what's left until June 30th anyway on anyone you're paying out.
If we incur it into 20, it's not going to be a problem to put it in 21?
I don't think so. I mean, you're going to incur it in 20, but you're still not even going to know about it till the end of fiscal 20. And I mean, it's going to be what, 25 days from the date this is due that you're going to know the answer.
True.
They haven't said anything about, you can't go back and say that something happened beforehand. I think they're just trying to get ahead of things and make sure towns have the money in their coffers to be able to cover costs.
All right. So not so much about this as 20 expenses and 21 expenses. There's going to be a 20 payout and a 21 payout.
I think so. I mean, to the best extent possible, we want to try to keep things as separate as we can, because that will help Jean keep her sanity when she's figuring this stuff out and documenting it. But nothing I've seen thus far has said, no, you can't talk about an expense you incurred in 20, you missed the boat.
All right, because it would be preferred to let that come through, because we may have, depending the offer we've made with the police, we may have some of that deferred into next year anyways. So it'd be better to get the actual numbers and to make a guess at it. If we stop putting fictitious numbers in there, they might not be happy with us.
And don't forget, Greg, I also had asked the FEMA rep for our area if this was reimbursable through FEMA unpaid vacation or paid out vacation due to not being able to take leave due to the corona. And the answer I got was no, but put in for it anyways because you might get it. So it may possibly be reimbursable by FEMA, but that was the best answer they could give me.
We'll give it a try either way. Thanks, Bob.
Okay. All right. Next items, we get into other. There's 2 Henry Woods building project updates, front door repair quote, and repairs to flashing. Do you have any updates on that, Heather?
I do a little bit, not too much, unless Sandy, if you're able to tune in here on anything you have for additional feeds. So Sandy was great, and she reached out to a contractor originally on the door to get some more quotes, because as we talked about, Matt, you were able to do the temporary fix, but we still have to ultimately do the final fix, and we need to see what the cost is for that. So she was able to reach out to that individual. When she did so, she got additional information relaying the potential that there was a concern with the flashing on the roof. If you remember, we had a little bit of the leaking from the roof during that last major rainstorm. And the guy who was looking at the door suggested that he believed it was possible that part of the problem with the door actually came from the water that was getting inside, which was likely because of flashing. And I know Sandy was going to reach out to the DPW. Sandy, do you have any updates on either of those things?
I do. I called Ben Bassett and left him a message. He's the one that repaired the leak on the town hall. So I'm just waiting to hear back from him to see if he can come look at the flashing. Worcester Door came out, measured everything, and I'm just waiting for a quote from them. So that's all I have.
And Sandy, what did Worcester Door say about the door? I know you told me he thought the hardware was in good shape.
Yeah, he said the hardware was expensive, but it was in very good shape. And part of the reason that it wasn't shutting right is because the door shifted, the frame shifted, so the door's not level. So it didn't shut right. That's why it would stick. So he's going to be able to still use that hardware. He'll just put it on the new door. So we can save the hardware.
Nice.
Thank you, Sandy.
You're welcome.
Thank you much.
You're welcome.
Next item of open business is normally we do this around April after elections, but elections got postponed and then held off, and then who knows where we're at. So I thought it was the right thing to put it on the agenda to open up the board to reorganize for nominations for chair, vice chair, and clerk. I'll put a nomination out there. I'll nominate Greg. He's gone through a full term. He's already technically 2 to 3 months into what would be his second term, assuming he got elected again in April. Without another person on the ballot, it's a high likelihood he'll get reelected. So
Maybe.
Why hold off? So I'll nominate Greg as chairman if he's interested in it.
I would be.
I would gladly second that motion.
All right.
Thank you.
Call for a vote.
Yes.
Clark, yes.
Matt Urban, yes.
O'Sullivan, yes.
Do we have a nomination for vice chair?
Do you want to keep it a position of vice, or do you want to take a break from stuff, Matt? And what are you looking for in that? Do you
I'll be honest.
yeah.
I almost think vice chair technically is the least responsible in a way, like less signatures required. The clerk kind of has to sign all the minutes and do that stuff. And so in a way, vice chair actually would work better for me to kind of step back and breathe a little in that regard. But also I don't want to hold Dylan back or make Dylan feel like he's got to stay. So if
And,
I don't have a strong feeling either way, to be honest, on this topic.
then I'll nominate Matt Urban for the vice chair.
I'll gladly second that nomination, or that motion.
you're now chairman, Greg, so you run this meeting.
Well, then I'll finish the meeting. Any further discussion on that?
No.
Then I'll call for vote. All those in favor?
Clark, yes.
Matt Urban, yes.
And O'Sullivan, yes.
I nominate Dylan for remaining a clerk.
I will second that motion. Any discussion?
No.
Call for vote. All those in favor?
Aye,
Clark.
Matt Urban.
Clark, yes.
And O'Sullivan, yes. It is so reorganized.
Okay.
And then I'd have to look at what we have left, if anything, in here. We're going to get back to the front page. I was just scrolling down, way down in this. On about to page 28.
I believe on my agenda, I see meeting minutes, a
For
couple items of correspondence, and then I think we kind of roll into executive session.
Almost back to it. The meeting minutes. I've read through, I think, the first two of those. I don't know what you guys have had a chance to, because the packet came pretty late today at 5:30. So you guys have a preference of moving on them or putting them off till next meeting to get a chance to read them?
I think I would like to read them just a little bit more clearly. I got the gist of it, but I'd like to just do a double check.
All right, then why don't we table the minutes till the next meeting? We can all go through those for accuracy, which we always are pretty good at anyways. And correspondence, veteran services. I don't know what those are offhand. I haven't got through this packet either. So Matt, you want to cover, please, what the correspondence was received for the veteran services and charter? I'll go down and try to find them, but
I could do a double check, but I believe it is, the early disbursement was actually, I think, coming from state or federal.
Yeah, so the veterans, they're just notifying us that one of the disbursements from the veteran service reimbursements that we get, which is usually at 75%, which is usually 18 months lagging, is just coming a little earlier. That's the first one. That we'll receive it earlier than expected. Anticipate sending reimbursement payments to all towns by Wednesday, May 20th. So that's nothing overly exciting. And then the other one before that was Charter Communications, that around June 15th, TV channels 165 and 817 on Spectrum Lifestyle and TV Essentials will now be added. On June 16th, they'll launch Hallmark Drama HD, channel 177. So they're just giving you updates on channels and docs.
okay, well, that part was nice. That was relevant to make sure that the community heard, so I'm glad we read it. The first one for veterans is more for our internal accounting and things. So we would move into Selectmen Reports then. Matt, do you have anything for Selectmen Report?
I do not at this time.
Dylan,
Negative at this time.
and nor do I. My time was spent in looking to the town administrator search issues. So in that, now I got to find, I don't have the specifics for executive session. Let's take, pardon me, Heather, do you have a report for us other than what we've covered?
I do not. Most of my time has been spent on trying to handle any issues that come up, dealing with resident correspondence and making sure everyone's getting their issues and concerns addressed the best we can, working closely with finance, emergency management team, and trying to keep up the best possible with all of the changing COVID-19 stuff by the minute.
And from what I hear from people in town, you're doing a very good job of it. The department heads seem to be very happy with how you're handling things. And I want to again thank you for what you've done so far for us. And I wish you were considering staying, but to that end, I will just thank you.
Thank you.
We didn't have public comment earlier, did we?
We did not.
So we will take a moment now before we head to executive session to open up for public comment, for brief comments on either things we discussed or a topic somebody may want to bring up briefly, which would be limited to probably a minute. And if anybody wants to raise their hand or to request a comment, please do so now. So we will take a moment now before we head to executive session for brief either things we discussed. I'm getting a weird back feed on this.
I was trying to unmute the one person on the phone, so Sam's listening, and I think his video is a couple seconds behind our live feed.
That probably
I was trying to unmute him to see if he wanted to speak, because we have